Ladies and gentlemen. Hello? If I could get everyone's attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Kilian Riley, President of the Canadian Club of Toronto and your host. Viewers, thank you for joining us. Bienvenue à tous. As you know, our club does a great job of providing a forum for business, political, and cultural leaders to share their ideas with us. Today's panel is a fine example. I would like to start by acknowledging the generous support of today's sponsor, Scotiabank, represented by Kevin Teslick. Thank you. Merci. Now I have the privilege of introducing today's panel. Ontario's panel on economic growth and prosperity has a lot of ideas about how to make this province even stronger. Our panelists are no strangers to big ideas and to investing in potential. First off, the Dean of the Rotman School of Management and Chair of Ontario's panel on economic growth and prosperity, Professor Tiff Macklem. Tiff will give us an overview of the report findings. He is also a former Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. Then the panel will convene, which includes Stephen Carlisle, GM Canada President and Managing Director. Stephen is a sought-after business leader who serves on a number of councils and advisory bodies targeted at enhancing competitiveness and prosperity. Mary Ellen Anderson. Mary Ellen is an online media veteran who has worked for Canadian media giants CBC and CTV. The Microsoft Canada Vice President is now charged with making sure customers take full advantage of Microsoft Cloud. Bruce Flatt. Bruce Flatt heads up the leading global asset management firm, Brookfield Asset Management, which features 700 investment professionals in 100 offices over 30 countries. And moderating the panel this afternoon is Kilian Berz, Senior Partner and Managing Director of the Boston Consulting Group's Canadian practice. In addition to serving on the Economic Growth and Prosperity panel, he has been appointed as Special Advisor to the Prime Minister. Tiff and esteemed panelists, it's my great pleasure to turn the Canadian Club of Toronto podium over to you.
Well, thank you, Kilian. Welcome and good afternoon. I particularly want to thank our panelists for coming. I am very much looking forward to the discussion myself. I think we're in for a real treat. But before I turn it over to the panel, I want to say a few words about the study we did interviewing 33 CEOs and futurists across Ontario. You should have a summary of the study in front of you. The study was the brainchild of Ontario's Panel on Economic Growth and Prosperity, which is an advisory board to the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity at the Rotman School of Management. And as you just heard, I have the privilege of chairing the panel, and included both Kilian and Steve actually are members of the panel. The project was also a wonderful collaboration with Boston Consulting Group. So how it worked was, together with Kilian and Boston Consulting Group, we conducted 33 interviews of CEOs and futurists. They were fascinating, structured conversations, and I have to say we're very grateful for all the CEOs and futurists that gave us their time. And our panelists today were all among the people being interviewed. Now, these were not conversations about next quarter or even about next year. They were conversation about where can Ontario win over the next 10 to 20 years. What strengths can we build on? What's holding us back? Where should we invest? And what do businesses and governments need to do to fully realize Ontario's potential? So what did we hear? Well, first thing we heard was we heard some humility from the CEOs. They were the first to admit that they didn't have a crystal ball any more than the rest of us, and they were certainly more comfortable talking about their sector than about the whole of Ontario. But, you know, they're CEOs. So they got over their humility pretty quickly, and you know, they had views, and you won't be surprised, they were very articulate. So let me highlight a few of the common themes that came out before I turn it over to the panelists. Well, the first thing that came out very clearly was a great deal of optimism about Ontario's potential. Ontario is a great place to live and work, and the quality of life here is unparalleled compared to almost anywhere else in the world. Ontario, and indeed Canada, has abundant natural resources, it has a well-trained labor force, it has strength and diversity, and it has privileged access to global markets, particularly the US and now Europe. At the same time, there was also a strong sense that to sustain the standard of living we've come to enjoy, we're going to have to find some new sources of growth. The sources of economic growth and prosperity are shifting, and realizing Ontario's promise requires change. Now, among the 9 dimensions of competitiveness we tested with the CEOs, there was a strong consensus that our biggest strength is our talent. We have a great education system in this province, and we are home to a diverse population of skilled workers. This multiculturalism that abounds in the province enriches our workforce, both by providing access to a broader pool of labor and skills, but also it's helping companies tap into global markets. And indeed, as you can see from the charts in front of you, talent access and development and international talent and attraction and integration were 2 of the top 3 advantages that the CEOs focused on. The other dimension in the top 3 was the level and quality of research. As one CEO put it, we stand tall in research. For CEOs, particularly across information and communications technology, manufacturing, financial services, and health clusters, this leadership in research was seen as a critical advantage. So what's holding us back? The 3 dimensions that CEOs ranked Ontario the lowest on were research commercialization capacity, capital commitment to innovation, and risk-taking culture. Overall, there was a sense of optimism that the innovation ecosystem in Ontario is really strengthening, but the CEOs stressed that, you know, too often we're seeing inventions, big ideas that were, you know, research that was developed here being commercialized in the United States. We have some fabulous companies that are doing very well in international markets, but and we have lots of startups, but we are having trouble scaling rapidly in the global marketplace, particularly highlighting a dearth of later stage capital that companies critically need to scale into global markets. The other thing that was often lamented is that Canadian companies and Canadian governments are sometimes too skittish about taking on a new venture, on a new Ontario-based venture as one of their suppliers until that new venture has proved itself in the US market. The CEOs went on to offer some big ideas on how to realize Ontario's promise. Most of these were centered around 2 themes: talent and technology. A central theme was that by increasing the supply of talent, we can actually increase demand in this province. Building domestic talent requires an education system that aligns with 21st century skills. Coding, critical analysis, collaboration, these were things we need to embed more deeply in our educational system. And the other theme that came up very frequently was that with the US in particular looking increasingly inward, this is a moment in time for Canada. This is a moment in time. It's an opportunity to attract some of the leading talent from around the world, and the CEOs really encourage governments to seize that opportunity, streamline visas and immigration. On technology, the CEOs and especially the futurists really underlined the importance of embracing new disruptive technologies and really saw these as a source of competitive advantage. These technologies are coming, and it's the companies that experiment with them and invest with pace that are going to be the winners. Horizontal and platform technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence, big data analytics, and digital security were all very highly ranked, and indeed, more than 80% of the CEOs rank machine learning and AI as the most disruptive technology. I could go on. My mission here was to get you interested enough to go back and actually read the report, but more importantly, really to set the stage for what I think is going to be a wonderful panel discussion. As I mentioned, Kilian and I, along with BCG, did the interviews. Mary Ellen, Steve, and Bruce all participated, and I am really looking forward to hearing their stories and getting a little more color behind the interviews. So, Kilian, over to you.
Thank you. So Ontario in 30 years. Maybe about 30 million people, maybe about 20 million people between just Oshawa and Waterloo and Barrie. A flourishing economy driven off great talent and great tech-driven innovation, having advanced new sectors, but also our existing sectors. Ontario is the envy of the rest of the world. Our talent advantage is well known, all eyes on Ontario. Or we have a few sectors that are in decline. We can't really compensate for the decline enough. We can't really make our mark around the new generation of jobs and industries. And we stagnate or fall back. What is it going to be? So we had good discussions and debates. We have a few questions prepared, but you all have some opportunity to contribute. I already have one question, so please do contribute as soon as you're ready. And I'll make the best and do the best, hopefully, around bundling those questions. And I look forward to discussion. Bruce, Mary Ellen, and Steve, thank you. First question I'd love to start off with is, I think there's a lot that we have going for ourselves in Ontario, a lot. And I'm sure the vast majority in the room, just like CEOs, couldn't stop talking about how great Toronto is, despite some concerns about what the future may or may not be. What do you think might be missing, though, in the narrative that we can actually translate that sense of we have something great and great assets, translate that into the future so that we make the question maybe truly our destiny? Bruce, let's start here, and then we go along.
Thanks, Kilian. And first, for the record, I'll take box A. So look, I'd say the following, and I'm not sure this was captured in the study, and the study can't capture everything. Our view has always been that Canada it's an amazing place to do business out of. And our business is about raising capital many places in the world, but disproportionate amounts in Canada, and investing internationally. And the pension plans are like us. And one of the great unwritten stories in the world today is the Canadian pension plans. And I spend my time traveling around the world and speaking to 300-400 institutional clients around the world. And the Canadian pension plans and the Canadian financial system and the Canadian advisory system and everything that's here is, I can't say it more clearly, it's the envy of everybody in the world. And I think look, machine learning is fantastic, and all the technology things are fantastic, and we should build on all those. But I do think that the more that we can crystallize on the benefits of all of those organizations that are here, these are huge amounts of employment in downtown markets, not only Toronto, but a big part in Toronto, and all the spin-offs that come with it, many people in this room. So I think that story is not, it's known around the world, it's not as recognized in Canada, and I think we need to, I guess, focus on more of that.
Very good.
It's interesting because when you asked me this question, I didn't think I was so worried about what was missing from the narrative as much as the fact that the narrative is completely missed by people outside of Canada. And so what I mean by that is that we here know that we have this amazing scientific community. But when Microsoft bought Maluba and then invested in Element AI and announced we were going to put a research place in Montreal, so many people inside Microsoft were pinging us and saying, I didn't know you guys were really strong at AI. I didn't know you were fantastic at research. They had no clue. And it's the same sort of thing. I was doing some surfing last night and noticed TechCrunch talked about the fact that hey, believe it or not, Canada's got 3 really strong startup communities. And this is just last April. And they were talking about, of course, Vancouver, Montreal, and the Toronto KW Quarter. So everybody seems to be missing the narrative. So if anything, we need to get a better job of like, okay, here's the 3 things or 4 things we're going to celebrate. And then we have to tell our story and make sure that people know. And again, we know we have a fantastic workforce. It's super diverse. But people are sort of missing that part too. Yeah. So I think it's not so, I'm not worried so much of the fact what's missing. I'm worried that people just don't know enough about us.
Well point. Well put.
Yeah, I would come at it, if you asked me 2 years ago what was missing in the narrative, I would have answered it more that way, in that, awareness of what the strengths and capabilities were. Because we enter into it as an industry that's going through a big transition from we call it Auto 1.0, so it's cars as you've known them. And in Ontario, that means manufacturing, and moving into what we call Auto 2.0, which are cars that are connected, electric, autonomous, and shared. And by the way, in 30 years, what it'll look like is we're driving around in robo-taxis with a lot less congestion and emissions. So that's one thing.
I love that.
But I vote for Box A too, because of that. We put ourselves through an inventory of, well, what's really here. I graduated from the University of Waterloo. Shout out to Waterloo. Okay, great. I've come to know that Toronto's a really good school too, so. Which is why I'm on the panel with Tiff and others. Yes. But we went deliberately through 14 schools, every engineering school in Ontario and a couple others outside of the province, just to get a sense of what's there. That's about 2 years ago. And as I look today and what it's like to hire in these skill set areas of ICT and IoT, it's getting more and more difficult. So I think the world has found out, and you described several of the investments. As we were getting ready for the event, we went through and did an inventory of, well, what investments have come into Ontario over the past 18 to 24 months in ICT. And it's pretty phenomenal. It's a global list, the last one that I looked at, and you can see the mix shifting visibly from the United States and Canada becoming more and more prominent on that list, and Ontario specifically. So I think the way the corporate world works is you find something out, you're not necessarily going to tell your neighbor, you're going to get in there as fast as you can. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. That's the stage that we're in. I was asked on another panel, do you see a threat of Industry 4.0 to Toronto, are we being left behind? And it's already happening in Toronto. It really is. And so what I see missing in the narrative, or a gap that we need to think, how do we keep up with that, right? Because my worry would be that we attract these investments, people come, and then they can't hire, right? Because the skill sets have become scarce. AI and machine learning is a great example where we have a terrific talent pool, and in Toronto specifically, and more specifically around the university. It wouldn't take a lot. You asked us a hypothetical earlier on about what if Amazon dropped in here. That would be a big problem. A happy problem on the one hand because it's huge employment. Yeah. It's aligned with a very bright future. On the other hand, it would tend to crowd out. So I don't know that we've got the capacity or the capability to keep up with the potential that's out there for all of us.
Well, it's a great description of the optimism around Box A and what you're all doing to make Ontario go down the Box A path. But actually, you're embedding a great challenge in it too. And I think that leads to the next question that we should really debate. So we have this, and I think it's overwhelmingly recognized, this incredibly diverse and deep and rich talent pool. And it goes from very, let's call it traditional capabilities that are incredibly deep and professional capabilities that are very high standard to new and leading capabilities that we need. And yet, there's almost a chicken and egg challenge. How many of those new tech-driven and tech-oriented graduates and how many maybe mid-career people do we want to reorient? And do we have, on one hand, enough jobs? Or would we potentially, on the other hand, have a constraint in the supply base? And you brought up the Amazon example. I've heard over last week several people say, even the times where players like Amazon in market looking for 100 or 200 people, it actually makes the local market more competitive already at that point in time. And our local startups have a harder time to attract some of the same people. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be a really great opportunity and problem to solve, to have large international players really committing to Toronto. But are we ready for it? So the question on the talent is really twofold. One is, what's the strongest sort of differentiating strength that we need to start leveraging more and more so that we don't run out of gas, to your point? But also, how do we potentially deal with limitations? Because we really wouldn't want a lack of foreign investment just because we say, you know what, we're not ready for it. Why don't we go to reverse order? Back to Steve, continue your perspective on that, and then we come back.
Well, I think STEM education is something that we're really good at, right? Our numbers, if you stack Ontario up against California, we're prolific in terms of STEM graduates, and our schools get recruited accordingly, right? Some of our schools in the province are very highly recruited in California and Seattle and so on. So is that happening at the pace? Do we have the throughput for that to continue? And I think the other thing I think about is you strip it away one layer is based on the tendency of the world, is the STEM skill set alone enough to be successful? Because there's a very human part of all these technologies as well, and these products and services. Some people call it STEAM. We put arts into STEM. But I think of it as more, are we graduating technical people that can work in multidiscipline companies with the business acumen? And one path to that is work integrated learning. We have some schools with good co-op programs. Co-op students are very highly sought after, but do we have sufficient co-op and other work integrated learning programs to support? Just because you have a good technical degree doesn't mean you're going to be highly recruited and hired. You have to have a different kind of skill set in the future. I think we're a little shy on that, Mark, and we have such terrific examples and benchmarks of how we could do better. That would be one area that I think we could focus on, is expanding that to the other terrific institutions that aren't necessarily playing in that space. Because people will hire co-ops. If anyone hires co-ops, what a great experience that is in terms of what they can contribute. And then the idea of an extended job interview, and they're much better placed in terms of landing in the workforce when they graduate.
I think it's true. There's so much overwhelming evidence, not just in Canada, but globally, that markets and education systems that have dealt with the co-op model are superior. So that would be certainly a fantastic push to get to the next level of productivity. Mary Ellen, a perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm in the middle of building out this new team and hiring 26 people, and then across Microsoft Canada, we're already, I think, causing some problems because we probably have more than 100 openings, and they're primarily for tech people. So if anyone's interested, reach out. And one of the things, and one of the things we talk a lot about is we have to be really careful because we start kind of stealing from our partners or stealing from our customers.
Yeah, right.
And so we focus a lot on, are there people that we can bring in from other markets? In fact, there's an interesting stat that says that 30% of the STEM workers aren't in the locations where you would expect them to be. And so we're going to have to look further afield, and we're going to have to be really, smart about where we're going to find them. But then so two interesting things started to happen recently. We have this little thing called Skype that we use, and people can ping you in the middle of the night, late at night when you're trying to get some work done quietly. And more people are pinging me from other countries that work for Microsoft and telling me they already have permanent residency to come to Ontario, to come to Canada. Now, you know how complicated that is to get. And they've already decided that this is one of their countries they want to move to. And they've gone through the process and they're ready to come here. And that makes them super attractive. So all of a sudden, there's like 3, 4 people in my pipeline that I know that the second they land, they can start working. And that's amazing. But what was it? I'm dying to understand what was it that got them to say, I want to come to Canada. And then the other side, that 2 more key points about how do we keep finding these talents. One is, unfortunately, still today, it's something like 1 in 100 young girls want to go into STEM. What catastrophe is happening that we still can't get young girls to be interested in these careers? These careers that are a license to print money. Trust me, I started in media. I made nothing. I switched to Microsoft, and I'm like, oh, I now have a farm north of the city because I don't know what to do. It's all this. I keep telling this to people. Are you crazy? Get into STEM. It's a license to earn money, you know. And they think I'm kidding, and I'm not. And so anyway, this is the thing. How do we get young women involved? This is like super, super important. And then the last thing is, we have to think about how do we constantly upskill people. And it used to be that we talked a lot about, and I would be in interviews, and there'd be this list. Do you know this? Do you know that? You know, and it was often the Microsoft stack, and now no one cares about the Microsoft stack, and it's now all open source. And if you get that joke, you'll understand that that's a huge shift. But anyway, what was interesting about it now is like we're like, no, you don't have to know anything. You just have to be able to learn. Because again, there's other stats that show that 65% of the students will be doing jobs that they don't even exist tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I just want to know that you're keen on learning. And if you can come in, I'll figure out a way to teach you. But now, how do I get you to drive the targets we need to hit and learn on the job without you having to work, 24/7 and including weekends? So all these things are going to be what we have to think about in the future, and especially that lifelong learning and skilling and figuring things out. And it's keeping us up at night, to be honest, because we haven't got the answers yet. So if anyone does, reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn that we own.
Good. Bruce, allow me to ask Mary Ellen a follow-up question, which was the first question from the floor. There are clearly a lot of global studies and a lot of evidence that the participation of women in the economy is potentially one of the biggest drivers to ongoing growth. And at the end of the day, particularly as we have aging economies, that is even more so a relative driver. You talked about the issue of girls and women maybe not graduating from the topics that might be the most in demand. Are there other things from your perspective that could and should be done so that we actually allow ourselves, allow our companies, allow the startup sector to just create an environment where we have more participation of women?
One of the things we're starting to do in hiring is once we've actually seen research that if people look at a resume and they see a woman's name, they often judge it differently. And so one of the things we're trying to do is blind reviews. So those initial reviews, just look at the qualifications and take out the fact that it's a woman. And then, so that's something we just started during this process in the last 2 months. And it's very interesting because I recently just went through a process where we have these very deep technical interviews, and one of the strongest women that I know from India was actually got a no hire. And I was like, how can that be? Like, this was a person I've been waiting for 6 months for a job to open to bring her in. And there was a miscommunication on what we were looking for. And this, again, the person interviewing was thinking that she had to know everything. And all I wanted to know is, do you think she's a good fit for the team? Because I know she can learn anything once she gets here. So there's things like that. And then there's ways to how we go about advertising roles. Sometimes it's in a very kind of masculine way, as opposed to a lot of tech speak instead of talking about things that are important to women. Like, you can work mobily or remotely. We respect the work-life balance. We understand you're going to have to, balance life, between your responsibilities to your family and work. So there's all these different ways we have to approach it. And I think that if you think about it, we have this massive shortfall, and yet 50% of the population isn't even really participating in trying to get into that game. And then, as I said, it sets then a lot of women up for being in a position where they're not going to be as financially stable or independent as what a lot of men, the same advantage. Mm-hmm. You can tell, this is the number one thing we're thinking about these days, you know.
Steve, you're trying to get in.
We've shifted our CSR strategy, so with now a much greater emphasis on women in STEM, because the studies that we've looked at would say that there's this critical period around grade 8, kind of at that age where you're going to make a fundamental decision. Are you going to follow a technical or scientific sort of education path or something else? And so we put a lot of effort in how do we engage girls up until that time frame to get them interested, you know, be in the classroom with employees and working with organizations like Ennui and Go Code Girl and that kind of thing to get girls excited about science and the kind of potential so that they're thinking about that when they're making that critical decision. The reaction is tremendous when you do that. But it's probably a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to do. Yeah. And then I support also what you're saying in terms of how we do the screening and so on. There's some great tools, by the way, AI type of tools in terms of how to write job descriptions to attract and and that kind of thing. But I think we need to think about getting much farther upstream in the talent pipeline into you know, elementary school and even before that to get women excited.
I can tell you some of that is working because I have 2 girls, grade 6 and grade 9, and they both have come home and said, I'd like to go into STEM. And I didn't even know they knew what that was, right? And then they explained it to me and it was about right. Bruce, any perspective on the talent question?
You know, I just because we have a little bit different business, we're a Canadian-based company, and so we have a different issue, and everyone's always got issues. But our issue is, what we do is, we actually never import anyone to Canada. In fact, our issue is, we're a Canadian-based company. We train lots of people. We bring people in. We train them here, and they always go elsewhere. So we're exporting people. So we may be part of the problem. Our issue actually is, and while we have lots of people all around the world, we like to have people trained in the culture that we have of our organization to be able to go to those offices. Our issue is, Toronto is a really great place to grow up. It's a really great place to be. And therefore, many people that go around the world, they always want to come back. Or they don't want to go. So our actually issue is even that. It's an issue that this is a great place. Therefore, it's a selling feature for all your people to come here. But and that's no different any country in the world. But our issue is we're always trying to export because our service is exporting investment services around the world, and by a Canadian-based company. And so our issue is, how do we make sure we can have enough people that are willing to move around the world and do that kind of thing? Because Toronto's it's a great city, and it's tough to leave. Roots and all those things.
I think many, if not all of us, agree. I think you're also alluding to one of the greatest assets that Ontario and Canada has is a lot of Canadians in great international positions that often are somewhat connected to Canada, but not as much. And they're a great asset for us to bring talent both directions, experience in the globe, and then bring them back when it's time to enjoy the beautiful standard of living in Ontario. So we only have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to shift into sort of a category around potential barriers and potential concerns. And I'm going to list a few and then let you react to them. One is, and Tiff alluded to it, it's sort of an observation that relatively speaking, the reinvestment of corporations in Canada, reinvestment levels are not as high, or the foreign investment attraction is not as high. And a question around, is this a mindset problem around just how much risk we take? Also for the sort of scaling up stage, you know, are we not taking enough risk, or are there other problems? Or is there actually a structural problem behind it? And then related to that, there is, I think, a question, you know, are some of the current political decisions, whether it's at the federal level or the provincial level, whether it's minimum wage, et cetera, like other decisions, tax rates, are decisions that are actually going the wrong direction? Are they going to drive away some of our top talent? Are they going to drive away companies? Are they going to drive away money that otherwise would come here? Are you concerned? If so, what should we do?
So I'll take the first one, which is on investment, just risks and investment. And what I would say is I think I started 30 years ago in business in Canada. And at that point in time, the common thesis was that anybody that goes to the United States is going to get it handed to them, and they're all going to lose their money. And in fact, there were many cases that happened. And I think what the great thing that's happened over the past 25 years, I'll call it, is that there are many great success stories of Canadians going international and doing well. And that now, I think, is in the second phase for Canadian companies. So I think I'm not as negative as on this. I actually think it just takes time. Like, it's been 25 years. Now there's a lot of success stories. The next 25 years is going to be way, way better because it just takes time. And what's happened now is there are all of these stories for people, and boards would say, we're not going to let CEO go and make an acquisition in the United States or in Australia or in the UK or whatever it is because 12 other people blew their brains out. And I think what's changed now is that has opened up. And so I think the next 25 years of building Canadian companies internationally will be much easier because of the success stories over the past number of years. So I think we might look at it as people are being risk averse. I actually don't think so. I actually would say that it's just it takes time, and we've got all the tools, and I think people will do better. I'm a positive guy.
Love your optimism. Exactly. In fact, Bruce, when we spoke to him a few months ago, he said, my biggest problem is that I'm dealing with all these global investors, and they would like to co-invest with us. Brookfield, of course, has a terrific track record. And the number one question to ask me is, bring some more ideas from Canada to me. They would love to put more money in Canada. And so there's this question about where do those opportunities come from?
In Canada, every one of those investors, international investors, wants to come in Canada. What we have, though, is lots of money and not that many opportunities. Yeah. But that's fantastic. We just have to hone our skills internationally investing, and those jobs stay here in Canada. Yeah. So that's a very positive thing.
Just need a bit more privatization, maybe. That'll help.
We'd take that too.
Good. Any other thoughts around potential barriers, and do you have concerns?
I think I have a little bit of a different perspective on I still think of it as a risk-adverse culture that we have in Canada, where I see it has incredibly improved in the last little while, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, and we see more and more startups being able to stay in Canada. One of the things that I had this great story, I was having breakfast with a venture capitalist from the US, and she was saying, yeah, you guys crack me up. Your startups are apologizing because they have $5 million in revenue, and they're asking for way less money than the New York startup who has absolutely nothing, just an idea and a couple guys that are starting to code, and they expect way more money. And she says, like, what is this that everybody expects you have to have a business before you actually get investment? And that's from that history of people being risk adverse. Like, prove it to me, it's a real business, and then maybe I'll give you 10K, and that's not gonna even keep the lights on. So there's that aspect that I think is interesting, and I see it shifting, which is really, I agree, it's much more positive, and I see us, moving away from it. But the other thing that's really tough, to the point where, our federal government is even talking about it, is companies also, they want to make sure that this new solution has been proven out to the point that it's like flawless before they actually use it. And that gets really difficult. I mean, if you think about the success of Shopify and Hootsuite and Slack, people just embraced it. It wasn't necessarily perfect in the early days, those solutions, and now they're amazing solutions. And so we have to really, whereas again, a lot of the startups and the independent software vendors that I've been working with for the last 5 years, they prove everything out in Canada. They love proving their solutions here, but they go and sell them in the US because somebody in the US will look at it really quickly and then boom, make a decision. Where they're doing 5 and 6 and 7 meetings over a year here in Canada before somebody says, okay, yeah, I guess I'll try you, but only for this small group of people. They're going to use it first and then we'll see. And so I think that's the experience or the exposure I've had. And when I hear them saying that Canadian companies and public sector are embracing their solutions as fast as the American companies are, then I know we will have really changed that culture in Canada.
It's a great call out. In fact, you're addressing another question. And Steve, you can probably speak to that too. Yeah.
Well, I come at it, if I look at it through the lens of manufacturing, and because we've depended on manufacturing in Ontario for quite a long time, and you can start to make some distinctions within the manufacturing environment. So you have manufacturers that are gravitating to technology faster than others, focusing or shifting resources more into innovation on technology, whether it's product or process. My worry is those that don't, will get left behind. So if we want to continue to be manufacturers as we have done for the past 50 or 100 years, as is the case in automotive, then that's something that I would be worried about. And why that happens, I guess we're not quite sure. We're on some other panels trying to work our way through that, whether it's a lack of awareness or a lack of wherewithal or a lack of desire or grit or motivation. We don't know, but that to me is quite a worry in terms of how do we transform our manufacturing sector so that it remains competitive. There's some terrific examples of terrific successes of Canadian companies that are playing globally very well, like Magna and Linamar and Woodbridge and people like that in our sector, but far more examples where we can't point to those successes. So that's a concern.
Mm-hmm. Let me try and wrap up this round with one question. If you could give our political leaders one piece of advice, what they need to do differently to just embrace that optimism that you talk about, foster the opportunities, encourage that next level of risk-taking investment, what piece of advice would you give our political leaders?
You go ahead.
Oh, come on. That's not fair.
I'll start.
Steve is ready.
I would just say, look, anything the government can do to promote small business, large business, and all business, just doing its thing. They don't have to do anything for us. They don't have to put programs in place. Just get the environment right. And if they get the environment right, business will take care of itself. Like I don't think it's any more simple than that.
That's a good one.
I let you say first if you want.
No, that was really good. For the first thing that came to mind was just don't be like the U.S., but in terms of their current political climate, I think this, and I know I'm not supposed to say it out loud, but I think the big thing is just to keep embracing that cultural diversity and keep making it, for those of us that do need and want to bring workers in from other countries to make that possible. I think that what's happening in terms of Toronto and different communities around the hub, the epicenter of artificial intelligence and research that's going on here is incredible. And we've got to just make it so super simple for people to come in and join that incredible, it's just this wave of innovation that's happening. And we want to be the hotbed. We don't want somebody to decide that it's another city. So the more that we can have people come here and work together here, I think that's the biggest thing for us.
I think speed is critical. This shift is happening, I think, much faster than we might appreciate. So there's some great policies that are being developed and debated around innovation and clusters and things like that. So we cannot go too fast on those things, I don't think. Because it's a very active global competition, to land these mandates and do this work and attract the people and so on. And it's going very, very fast. So speed would be a one-word summary.
Thank you. I mean, our future is definitely not a destiny, as we found, but I think it's in our hands to turn it into gold. So let's do that.
On behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I would like to thank you for kickstarting our season with such a rich and engaging conversation. Ontario definitely earns the enviable position of being the economic engine of our great country. And I would say you actively promoted that, and the positive and optimism that you outlined today was great to hear. I think through innovative investments, diversification, partnerships, or the many possibilities outlined in the panel report, Ontario's potential is limitless. The future is very bright. Now, I don't know if everyone noticed at their seat, you have this booklet. And on the back, if you would like to access the report, I know I am very interested now in accessing the report. There is direct access and website and Twitter addresses on the back so that you can directly access the information. Stephen, Mary Ellen, Bruce, your personal examples of leadership and your commitment to excellence are very inspiring. I would agree with Kilian that your optimism for the future is very nice to see, and I think I saw lots of humility today myself. Stephen, I do look forward to that robo-taxi in the years to come. We wish you all continued success in your leadership roles. To our moderators, Tiff and Kilian, we are deeply appreciative of the insightful conversation that you led for us today and for your efforts to promote our province's potential. Before we conclude, here are some highlights for the upcoming club events. On Tuesday, September the 26th, we have Canada's ambassador to the United States, the Honourable David McNaughton, will be at our podium. And on Thursday, September 28th, Nobel laureate Dr. Arthur B. MacDonald, Professor Emeritus of Queen's University, will discuss his groundbreaking research, his collaboration, and how it has progressed since his award. To order your tickets or to learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation via Twitter and Instagram by following us at CDNCLUBTO or by using that. We would also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. To learn more about the club, please visit us at thecanadianclub.org. Thank you all for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you again to our esteemed panelists and moderators. Have a great afternoon. Merci et à la prochaine.